China just rejected a treaty that would actually completely break up China. Good job. China is bleeding Russia dry, and a Stanford University chair is helping the Chinese nuclear program. Then more on this week's China News headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. YouTube is really killing us. Check this out. Nightpop says, man, this is the first notification I get from you in a year and a half. I thought this channel was closed, because when I typed China Uncensored on search, nothing relevant came up. And Flag Drones writes, the search feature on YouTube came up with no match until I had every single letter typed in, which seems quite odd given the sheer number of subscribers you've earned over 12 years. Things are getting pretty rough for China Uncensored, and I need your help or else this could really be the end of the show. Subscribe to my exclusive website, ChinaUncensored.tv. Without your support, I don't know if I can keep making China Uncensored. And it's Christmas time. A subscription makes a great gift for anyone full of anti-communist fervor. A shocking new investigation has found that Stanford University's Earth Sciences chair has collaborated with China's nuclear program. Considering how many versions of the same story I keep reporting on, is anyone else getting the impression that just because you work for a college doesn't make you smart? Over the last 20 years, Wendy Li-Wen Mao has co-authored at least 50 papers with the Center for High Pressure Science and Technology, or HP-STAR, which is an alias for China's nuclear weapons program. It also sounds like Hipstar, which would be a great name for a terribly ironic hipster band. At least 12 of these papers were written after the US Department of Commerce added HP-STAR to the entity list in 2020. And the research for these papers was funded by such notable entities as the US Department of Energy, Department of War, National Institutes of Health, and National Science Foundation, among others. How many times do I have to report that taxpayer money is funding CCP research before the government gets a hint and starts looking into it? But that's not all. Between at least 2016 and 2019, Mao also maintained a visiting scholar position at HP-STAR's lab in Shanghai. She even currently has an HP-STAR email address. Of course, neither of these bits of information show up on her Stanford career page. On top of all that, Mao worked as a researcher with the Beijing Institute of Technology and Northwestern Polytechnical University, both of which are key institutions for funneling technology to the PLA. Now, to be fair, her public research doesn't directly involve the testing, design, or development of nuclear weapons, but at least some of it is directly applicable to modern nuclear arms. She also trained at least 5 HP-STAR employees as PhD students, 4 of whom returned to China to work with the company. So either she's doing this on purpose, or she's really dumb. And as we just established, just because she works for a college doesn't mean the latter is off the table. One China expert explained Dr. Mao effectively provides HP-STAR-linked scientists access to US national lab resources, training, equipment, and funded research. That kind of access is exactly what China's research system tries to cultivate abroad. So clearly, this is a grave danger to American national security and a stain on Stanford's reputation. The good news is that all of this was revealed by the Stanford Review, so at least the university's journalism students are trying to keep it accountable, which is more than many US universities can say. US President Donald Trump has signed new legislation regarding Taiwan. And boy, is West Taiwan mad. You know, the CCP getting angry over Taiwan is so predictable, it's become a cliche. And yet, it pleases me every time. The legislation requires the US State Department to update guidelines on America's official relationship with Taiwan at least once every 5 years, which doesn't sound like much, but it basically means that although the US officially has a diplomatic relationship with the People's Republic of China, the CCP, that could change at any moment. Or, well, at least at some point every 5 years. It's a way to open doors to Taiwan, which is exactly how they took it. Taiwan's presidential office spokesperson Karen Kuo said the law affirms the value of U.S. interaction with Taiwan, supports closer Taiwan-U.S. relations, and stands as a firm symbol of our shared values of democracy, freedom, and respect for human rights. And the Taiwan foreign minister told reporters this law would allow Taiwanese officials into federal agencies for meetings, even though the law doesn't specifically mention anything like that. The long and short of it is this law brings the U.S. and Taiwan closer together, and that is something that the CCP absolutely hates. I just can't stop smiling. Speaking of Taiwan, a Taiwanese airline is seeking a role in the island's whole-of-society defense plan by using surveillance flights to counter China. Is that a giant lazy Susan? 'Cause the table's turning. Apex Aviation is usually used for charter flights, pilot training, and aerial ambulance missions. But its Tecnam P 2012 model also uses American-made synthetic aperture radar that can spot objects as small as 0.09 square meters, and has already monitored Chinese ships near Taiwan. Now it wants to feed all of this surveillance information to the Taiwanese military. As it is, Taiwan already has recruited or tried to recruit businesses, civil agencies, and research institutes to help it fend off any potential Chinese invasion. So this isn't a novel concept, but there are some legal concerns. So the Taiwanese government is trying to establish a legal framework before this could actually get off the ground, which is kind of important as far as planes go. In other news, the relationship between China and Russia continues to be weird. On the one hand, a Chinese parts supplier has taken a 5% stake in a leading Russian drone-making company that has supplied drones used in the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which shows that the CCP is devoted to helping Russia, no matter what it says about achieving a just peace. Two words they wouldn't be able to define if you hurled a dictionary at their lying heads. After the announcement, Russian authorities quickly and quietly suppressed public information about the ownership of the company, but you know what they say. Once it's on the internet, it's there forever. Meanwhile, Russia is returning the favor by warning that it reserves the right to respond toughly to Japan's reported plans to deploy missiles on Yonaguni, a Japanese island near Taiwan, which is the least tough way they could have phrased it, right ahead of, "I'm going to tell my daddy on you." They said this even though Yonaguni is nowhere near Russia and has nothing to do with the war in Ukraine. Considering how badly Russia has fared in Ukraine and its difficult history dealing with Japan, I'm not convinced this is a good idea. But hey, if China's BFF wants to do something stupid, I ain't gonna talk him out of it. And amid negotiations over ending the Ukraine war, Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi was in Moscow at the same time as a US delegation led by Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, which is a total coincidence and has nothing to do with anything, I'm sure. But despite the no limits partnership, China is making Russia pay like a guy on a date that turns out not to be a date. And by that I mean a nearly 90% markup on sanctioned goods from China, compared to just 9% from other countries. According to the Bank of Finland Institute, between 2021 and 2024, Chinese exporters raised prices on important goods even as the quantity of items exported dropped. Obviously, thanks to Western sanctions, Russia has no choice but to pay this price. But this sure doesn't look like one friend helping out another. Putin's probably wishing he poisoned Xi's drink. The one time he doesn't poison a drink. The Brighton Soccer Club in the UK has apologized for a social media post featuring a World War II-era Japanese soldier that caused offense in China. If you're worried this is going to be another story of the UK simping for China, don't you hate being right? This all started with an educational project for school-aged fans, which seems innocent enough, but as part of the project, Japan international soccer player Kaoru Mitoma was photographed with kids holding an image of Lieutenant Hiro Onoda, who hid out in the jungle on the Philippine island of Lubang for 29 years after the end of World War II, refusing to believe the war was over. During that time, he killed 30 people he thought were enemy combatants, but he was greeted as a hero when he returned to Japan in 1974, which all sounds like an insane anime. And given that it lasted 29 years, it's actually shorter than most anime. So why was this such a big deal? Well, the thing is, Onoda was a World War II Japanese soldier. The Japanese military did some pretty awful things to Chinese people during World War II. Of course, Onoda didn't take part in any of that personally, but it's the spirit of the thing, honoring anyone associated with the World War II Japanese military, hence the outrage. Probably didn't help matters that the CCP is angry with Japan right now due to the new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi's horrifying remarks that an attack on Taiwan would threaten Japan. Brighton has since apologized, saying that they hugely value our money in China. Sorry, I meant to say fans in China, and had no intention of causing any offense. And China has just declared the World War II-era San Francisco Peace Treaty between the US and Japan illegal and invalid, which is an interesting choice, given that if the treaty had never happened, the entire post-World War II Asia map would look pretty different from the way it does today, and China would be the first to lose territory. But hey, if China wants to do something stupid, I ain't gonna talk them out of it. See, the San Francisco Peace Treaty wasn't just a peace treaty. It was also the document Japan used to renounce much of its colonial territory, including Manchuria, Taiwan, Penghu, the Spratly Islands, and the Paracel Islands. So if the treaty never happened, that means that legally speaking, Manchuria, the Spratlys, the Paracels belong to Japan, Taiwan's status goes back to undetermined territory, and China's claims over the South China Sea take a pretty big hit. Sure makes the whole spat with Japan pretty awkward. And speaking of the spat with Japan, according to the Chinese state-affiliated South China Morning Post, Japanese Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi is moving to ease weeks of tension with China over Taiwan by stating that the Japanese government's basic position regarding Taiwan remains as stated in the 1972 Japan-China Joint Communique, and that there's been no change to this position. The 1972 communique includes the idea that Taiwan is an inalienable part of the territory of the People's Republic of China, and that the Japanese government fully understands and respects this stand. But this isn't the walkback the CCP hopes it is, because Takaichi never said that Taiwan wasn't part of the PRC. She just said that if the CCP attacked Taiwan, it would pose a threat to Japan, which is to say that whoever currently owns Taiwan, Japan will be forced to get involved militarily if the CCP attacks it. And since the CCP doesn't actually control Taiwan and would need to attack it in order to gain control, well, what Takaichi initially said about Taiwan still stands. And finally, evoking the Second World War, China is urging Europe to take its side against Japan, just as French Prime Minister Emmanuel Macron paid a visit to Beijing. Basically, the argument coming from China is that they were on the same side as Britain and France against Japan during World War II, so Britain and France should support them against Japan now. Which is kind of ridiculous given that it was the Chinese nationalists that were on the same side as Britain and France, not the CCP, so in other words, the government of Taiwan. But hey, it's a brilliant argument. Remember how we were allies in taking down a genocidal authoritarian regime that wanted to take over the world? Well, this time, you should totally help one of those. And this episode is brought to you by you, my dear viewers, who have joined what I call the China Uncensored 50-cent army by subscribing to my exclusive website, ChinaUncensored.tv. Click this button to join or click the link down below. You'll be joining our fight against the Chinese Communist Party, who, really want to ruin all of our day. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.